Chester Borrows.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think it's important to note that from time to time, in response to courts' rulings, the government has to respond, or the Parliament has to respond in respect of law, and must do so through retrospective legislation. And retrospective legislation is a type that should only be applied with the strictest of criteria. It's true that the initial bill as proposed by the government was modified somewhat through the select committee process, and it did so after discussions across those parties that were represented in that select committee process. I'm also pleased to be able to confirm that in the course of that process there was received 438 submissions from the public. 20 were heard orally, and the others were received in a written form, and we were able, even within the narrow constraints of time, to be able to receive a departmental report in respect of those submissions. I want to thank those parties' representatives who were involved in the committee and the way in which they engaged with each other. Bearing in mind the words of the previous speaker, it's true to note that, and it's correct to note, that the Green Party, through their representative Keith Locke, maintained their position throughout that process. And I'd also just like to acknowledge that although the Green Party were never going to be part of or voting for or giving any support for this piece of legislation, the fact that the member engaged with the committee in the fairest possible and reasonable way, and his arguments were philosophical and were never personal, and it would have been good if that had been the manner that all parties engaged. But I am pleased with the way the members of the committee worked on this together. I would also like to acknowledge the work of the Honourable Rodney Hyde in that committee process, and the questions that he asked in the way that he too was able to engage. And I have to align myself with the comments of Charles Chauvel in being a little bit suspicious as to whether such engagement would continue past this election if we don't find Mr Hyde back with us, although some of us haven't given up hope on that score. I would like to say a thank you to once again to the committee, but most of all to the members of the public who, in very short time constraint, managed to put aside the duties of their day to be able to engage the committee in a very reasonable and full way, given the narrow constraints of time. I commend the bill.
Honourable